Thanks to a good patron, I got a pair of Texas Wind dies for my forge press, and I've used them a couple times, so I'm still learning them, but I've got them welded to a couple plates to fit my press. I've got a stack of 1084 and 15 and 20 tacked up here. We're going to get it in the forge. I first dip it in kerosene, and I've just coated the outside exposed layers with a little flux. We'll get it in there and heat her up. I'll give it a couple of light presses, and then I'll get on a little harder on the second go around. I'll usually do 3 forge welds or so, and then I'll start getting aggressive with it and drawing it out. I use kiss blocks to keep everything square and try to maintain some integrity to the pattern. I'm going to be creating C's and then W's to press our Texas Wind pattern into. I'll probably get up to, I don't know, 180 layers or something like that before we do the Texas Wind pattern. Then we'll get it drawn out and to the thickness that I want, somewhere around 1/2 inch, 5/8. And we'll clean it up, cut it up, restack it, tack it up, and do another round of forge welding. So I got our 20 layers drawn out, cut up into 4 pieces. They give us 80 layers. Now I'm ready to re-weld, draw it back out, do it all over again. I like to get up to about 240 layers, something like that. But this didn't come without some problems that I want to go over, and I didn't get to capture. When I did the forge weld, the very top bar in the stack, the original stack, about 2/3 of it didn't forge weld, and I noticed it about halfway through. I didn't have time to video all that. I took a chisel, knocked it all the way back to where it was welded, and then I ground it off, ground a ramp up to the welded piece. So I've got some differences in this bar. The other thing is it twisted. It should be perfect C's on each side, and it twisted so my bar is kind of like this. And I flipped the pattern when I cut it to match each cut and make my pattern come out, but my C's are twisted. Now I'm going to draw it out. That may look pretty cool on the pattern that I'm making, but we'll see. And a lot of that's due to me just being in a hurry. My good buddy Steve Schwarzer says, "Son, you do good work, but you get in a hurry." I tend to agree. But I think it'll turn out okay. But I'm going to do this process one more time. Actually, 2 more times. I'm going to forge weld, draw it out, cut it up into 3, forge weld, draw it out again, and then we'll do our Texas Wind pattern press. So I'll skip all that. We'll go straight to pressing in our Texas Wind pattern. So I've got a kiss block set up to give me a stopping point where I don't overpress this bar, because you can really pinch way down into it, and I don't want to get any thinner than my final thickness for my blade billet. Once I get it pressed, I'm going to just straighten it up here a little bit and make sure it's not bent or bowed. And now a lot of grinding. I've got the big boy out to do this grinding. I've got to cut all of those high spots down till I'm down to the flat of the billet. And now that I got it cleaned up, I just did a quick test etch to see what the pattern looks like. Now I'm going to be using a template to cut it out of the billet. I don't want to forge in anything and mess up that pattern. It'll just distort it more than it already is. So I'll just use this template and get it cut out. And since the bar's not annealed, I'm going to be chopping a lot of it off with a cutoff wheel and grinding the rest of the profile. And now I'll just surface grind it close to my final thickness and get ready for the next step. Okay, went ahead and surface ground it. Right now it's about 189 thousandths thick. It'll be a little under 3/16 when I get done. It'll probably be about 185 after heat treating and everything. I'll go back over it and then I will grind in a taper. But what I want to do now is thermal cycle this blade. And what that does is evenly distributes the carbides in the steel. When you're forging and manipulating the blade with all that pressing and the layers that are turned and twisted and the whole process, you've got uneven carbide, bad grain structure from the heating and cooling and all that stuff. You want to reset your steel, and that's what our thermal cycling will do before we go to harden it. That way, when we harden our blade, it'll evenly distribute those carbides and give us a good, clean blade. I'm going to put this in a stainless pouch so I can reduce decarb, and then we will harden and temper the blade and move on to the next step. Now, the only thing is with this pattern is the further you grind in, the bolder it's going to get. So kind of curious how that's going to look. I've only used these dies a couple times, and each time it's an experiment to see what gives me the best pattern. So hang around and find out. And we'll get it here into the kiln, and I'll do about 3 rounds of thermal cycling, and we'll harden the blade and temper it. When thermal cycling, you just pull it out at the temperature and let it cool to black, and goes back in for the next round. After hardening, that pattern starts to pop out. Now I'll surface grind it down to the final thickness. First thing I'm going to do is cut in the guard shoulders using a carbide faced file guide. This is real quick and easy. I do this with the mill a lot, but I'm going to be doing a friction fit, and I'm going to just use the file guide to cut them in. I've got a couple scribe lines here in the center of the blade to the thickness I want to grind to start grinding bevels. I like to grind a 45 degree thereabout to these lines, then start my bevels. I use a wore out belt to do that, and then use a good belt to start the bevels. Now with the bevels ground, I got it up to around 600, and then I'm going to start hand sanding. But before I do that, I'm going to grind in the false edge. Some people do this to begin with. I like to do it last. Feel like I have a little more control over it. There's a couple ways to do this, or several, but I do it a couple ways. And on a straight false edge where the clip is straight, not curved. If it's curved, I'll use a wheel. But if it's straight, I'm going to use the flat platen. And I'm going to go in a vertical position, and I'm going to hit at the top side and rock in. And I'll show you this when I start grinding. Now, the other way to do it is I'm kind of reluctant to show you is I put the grinder in the horizontal position and grind it this way. The problem is it's kind of unsafe, which is why I don't want to demonstrate it, because if you get this point into that belt that's coming at you, it will kick it into you. It could probably hurt you. But if you're careful, you can get away with it. Now I've put a center line here to have a reference when I'm putting in this false edge. So I'm going to show you the vertical method. It's harder to see, is why I like to do it in the horizontal most of the time. But this way is pretty safe because you're just going to rotate the blade while the belt's running this way. You won't never be against it with the point like you would if I'm in the horizontal position, at least on one side. So let's go grind it and you can see what I'm talking about.
I know it's hard to see what I'm doing. It's really hard to film and do this at the same time without me getting in the way of the camera, but I'm starting at the top and rocking in toward that point. You don't want to get too hot on your point there, you'll burn it. So you got to be real gentle and controlled doing this. I'll work this up all the way to 600 grit and then do some hand sanding. And I'll go ahead and get the false edge and the blade completely hand sanded. Now we're going to move on to the guard. I'm going to drill out the backside and mill it down to leaving me around 50 thousandths on the front side of the guard to fit up. I mill out the front side to around 2 or 3 thousandths under to where I can hammer it the remainder of the way on and get a good tight press fit. I'll use a file guide to fine tune it a little bit, get it up on the tang where I want it before I hammer it on. So you can see there we're pretty close, and that'll leave me enough room to hammer it on and should leave us a good fit.
With the guard fit up, now it's time to move on to the next step. I've already got my spacers cut, did them the same way as the guard. With the spacers done, before I move to the handle or do any profiling on the guard and spacers, I want to put some lineup pins in here. That way the stuff doesn't move from here on out. And then I'll do the same when I bring in the handle material. So what I'll do is glue these together and drill the lineup pin holes. Then we'll start on the handle. Of course, we've got some work to do at the tang for the butt cap, but that's where we're at now.
I just use a very small amount of super glue to hold them in place. Once it dries, I'll pull it off, drill out my lineup pin holes, and then I'll use a torch to separate them. I've already drilled out this piece of red stag, and I'm just fine tuning it to do the fit up. Hey, that fit up looks pretty good. So now what I want to do is thread the tang. I'll be taking it to the grinder, cutting it down to a 3/16 round for a 1032 thread. And we'll go ahead and get it threaded and test it out. looks pretty good. So now I'm just going to make a pommel nut, and I will take it and weld it into a pocket that I cut into the pommel. I just TIG it in and she's good to go. Just got to make sure everything's good and square. I'm just doing some fine tuning with a high-speed burr on the guard fit up where the shoulders meet the guard. I've got a guard template here that I'm using to trace it out on the guard material, get it profiled, and start doing the sculpting. Doing a little decorative work on the small spacers, kind of make it look like a rope, cutting it at an angle. I'm using a very small carbide burr. Now we'll just etch my logo. Go ahead and etch the blade, the guard, and the pommel. Now I'm going to shape our pommel up and take it to the next step. Cutting in some decorative scallops to match the stag where it meets the pommel. Really dresses it up nice. And that's it. Hope you got something out of this build. If you got any questions, leave them in the comments below. I want to thank my patrons, and I want to thank you for watching.